Good evening. Welcome to the latest IEA Book Club event with me, Sai Kamal. I'm the Academic Research Director here at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and I'm also a Professor of Politics and International Relations at St Mary's University, Twickenham. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Rainer Zitelmann to discuss his new book, The Rich in Public Opinion, What We Think When We Think About Wealth. Dr. Rainer Zitelmann holds doctorates in history and sociology and is also a successful entrepreneur and real estate investor. Dr. Zitelmann has written and published 23 books, which have been translated into numerous languages and published around the world. His books have been especially successful in China, India, and South Korea. His two most recent books before this one are The Power of Capitalism and The Wealth Elite. And Dr. Zitelmann also publishes a column on Forbes.com every Monday. Rainer, Dr. Zitelmann, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to hearing your opening remarks about your new book, The Rich in Public Opinion, What We Think When We Think About Wealth. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction. I appreciate to have this conversation today with you, and I hope I can be back in London. I think last year I've been 6 times in London, and now because of the coronavirus it's not possible, but I hope it will be possible again. And today I appreciate that we have this conversation. Yes, and I will tell you a little bit about my book and have a discussion about this. This is a book about the attitude of the population toward rich people, and especially about stereotypes and prejudice against rich people. And when I started to write this book, I wondered whether there is any academic research about this topic, or I mean about prejudice against rich people. And there are thousands of books about prejudice research. So like prejudice against black people, against Jewish people, against gay people. Even there are books about prejudice against overweight people and poor people. But there was almost nothing in academic research about prejudice against rich people and stereotypes. And so what I have done there, I commissioned an international survey, the first international survey to compare the attitude towards rich people in different countries. So we had this survey in the United States, in UK, in France, and in Germany, and we asked people dozens of questions. And in the end, we could distinguish between 3 different groups of people. The one group we called the envious people with very negative attitude toward the rich. I will tell you a little bit more about this. And then on the other hand, we had the non-envious people. And then we had some people in the middle that we called the ambivalent people. And we asked some dozens of questions, and an important topic was what we call social envy. And I should explain a little bit what we mean about it. Envious people, they don't want to improve their own situation to close the gap between them and the rich, but what is their preference? What is important for them? To make life worse for rich people, even if they have no personal advantage for this. Maybe this sounds a little bit abstract, so I can read only 3 of these questions to you to understand what we asked people. For example, we presented this statement to our interviewers. I think it would be fair to increase taxes substantially for millionaires, even if I would not benefit from it personally. Or another question was, I would favor drastically reducing managers' salaries and redistributing the money more evenly among their employees, even if that would mean that the employees would get only a few more pound or dollar or euro per month. Or the last one of only 3 of a dozen of questions. When I hear about a millionaire who made a risky business decision and lost a lot of money because of it, I think it serves him right. This was our Schadenfreude question. So this were a lot of questions. And And then we had these three groups that I mentioned. And what we did after this, we calculated a so-called social envy coefficient. That means the ratio between envious and non-envious people in one country. And because we asked in every country the same questions, and we had in every country this three different groups, we could compare the social envy in these three countries. And the result was that maybe to make it a little bit easier, is to say the bigger the number is, the more envious are the people in a country. One would mean that you have as many envious as non-envious people. And this was the case in Germany, where the coefficient was 0.97. But in France, we have much more envious people. The coefficient was 1.21. And then we had a huge difference to UK and United States, because in the United States, the social envy coefficient was 0.42 and in UK 0.37, what mean that you have less envious people in UK and United States and a much more positive attitude towards rich people if you compare it with Germany or with especially France. But, and this was another, I think, interesting result, if you distinguish different age groups, especially in the United States, you have a very different result for this. For example, in the United States, the young people, I mean people between 18 and 30 years, they have a very, very negative attitude to rich people if you compare it with older people. I speak about Americans older than 60. I will give you one example. One of our questions was, or the statement that we presented to our interviewers, rich people are good in earning money, but they are usually not decent people. And this very negative statement about rich people was supported by 40% of young Americans, and 23% disagreed. And if you compare it with older people in the United States, only 15% agreed with this negative statement, and 50%, so that means half of the older Americans, disagreed with the statement. So it was with a lot of other questions. We had, for example, one statement that we called the statement about zero-sum belief. With zero-sum belief, we mean the belief that poor people are only poor because rich people took it away from them. And a lot of young Americans share this zero-sum belief, but not the older ones. And this is different from European countries. First of all, in European countries, the difference between younger and older people was not so big. But when there was a difference, a smaller difference, it was exactly the other way around. So it means, for example, in Germany and in France, younger people were much more positive about rich people, or not much more, they were more positive than older people in Germany and in France. And then maybe as last thing, it was not only this international poll, but this book has three big parts. The first part is the theory about prejudice and the psychological mechanism of envy and prejudice. The second part of the book is this, the results of this poll where I talked about. And the third part is about rich people in media. For example, I'll give you one example. We had research how rich people are portrayed in Hollywood movies. And we analyzed 560 Hollywood movies, and the more in-depth, very in-depth research of 43 Hollywood movies. And we analyzed how rich people are portrayed if you compare it to their non-rich counterpart. Maybe a lot of you know this movie, for example, Pretty Woman with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. And in the beginning of this movie, Richard Gere plays a raider with shady methods and even with bribery of politicians and so on. And the counterpart was Julia Roberts. And so we have it in a lot of movies. And we saw the result of this analysis was that in most movies where rich people play an important role, like other movies, Wall Street or Wolf of Wall Street or this Pretty Woman, rich people were portrayed in a much more negative way than non-rich people. And we had the same results when we analyzed media like newspapers and so on about different topics. One thing that was very important is, for example, if rich people do something negative, then you have very often this form of generalization that it's so you see, this is the way rich people are. For example, rich people, maybe they evade taxes or something like this, or yes, then it's always very quick, the generalization. But this is the difference with other minorities, because maybe you remember some years ago we had a lot of terrorist attacks committed by Islamic fundamentalists. And every time, I don't know how it was in the UK, but in Germany it was every time after each attack, we got a short lesson in TV where someone warned us, please don't generalize it. Most Muslims are peaceful people and not terrorists. What is true, of course. But this is true for other minorities. But rich people is the only minority, and this is another result of the study, the only minority where it is allowed to say very negative things, even hate speech, that you never would accept with other minorities. Maybe in the end, I give you only one example. In Berlin, where I'm living, there were rallies, demonstrations where you had this poster, "Kill your landlord." Or I think in London, you had it in the financial crisis, puppets of bloody bankers hanging on Lambeth and something like this. Or we had this posters here in Berlin with a guillotine, and beside the guillotine, there was a slogan against the city of the rich. Or look at the internet, you can buy T-shirts, "Kill rich people," for example, and things like this. And some people find it funny, but I don't think that it's funny. And I give you maybe a thought experiment. Think about what would happen if someone would do the same thing with other minorities. For example, a poster with "Kill black people" or "Kill Jewish people." I think no one would think that it's funny, and everyone would be rightly outraged and shocked about it. So with other minorities, we are very sensible and maybe sometimes hypersensible today, but with rich people, it's different. And we had one question that we asked as well in all these countries, and we asked, what do you think? Sometimes we have to be cautious when you speak negative or criticize some groups of people. And the people answered, for example, 67% said you have to be very careful if you speak about Muslim, for example, or about black people. But almost no one, only very few in Germany, I think it was 9%, said that you have to be careful when you speak negative about rich people. So this is a difference between rich people and other people. And so you see, I can talk a lot of it. It's a book with 450 pages, but I hopefully this introduction gave you a little impression what it is about, and maybe we can have some further question and discussion now about this topic.
Well, Rainer, thank you very much. That's a wonderful opening few remarks. It's clearly generated a number of questions. in the Q&A function. But I wonder whether I can exercise the chairman's prerogative here and just ask you a couple of questions. When you look at your research and your data, do you see a correlation between negative attitudes towards the rich and support for political parties that favor redistribution policies? Does that play out in the political sphere? Have you got any evidence there?
Yes, we had it in, we had this question that there were some problems in France and in the United States. So we couldn't use this data, but we could use it in UK and we could use it in Germany. And sure, you could see a clear correlation, but I think this was not a big surprise that voters or supporters of Labour Party were much more negative toward rich people than supporters of Conservative Party. And in Germany, we had a very interesting phenomenon. We had, sure, as to expect that that left-wing voters were very negative toward rich people, but this was not a surprise. But as well, right-wing voters. You know, we have in Germany a right-wing party called Alternative for Germany. They have something like 10% of the votes, and the supporters of this party were as well much more critical toward rich people than the voters for other parties. So it's not only a phenomenon on the left, you have it also on the with far right people.
Okay, and just one more question before I go to the questions. We've got a number of questions. I think please keep them coming in. Are there any examples where the use of the word rich is really a cover, if you like, a disguise, if you like, or a subtle way of targeting one ethnic group? You know, I mean, of course, we know historically that you know, people used to use the word rich or bankers, but actually they meant, say, the Jewish minority in the country, for example. Does that still go on, or is it very, very different nowadays? You can't really see that. You know, are there particular groups that are stigmatized, but they use the word rich to cover up their prejudice?
Yes, it was, to be honest, not exactly a part of the survey, but you can see it in United States, that you have a lot of rich prejudice against Asian people, for example, because they are economically very successful. If you see the income pyramid in United States, you have black people, Latin people, white people, and Asian people that are much more successful. There's a lot of prejudice against Asian people that is very similar to prejudice against rich people. And you mentioned Jewish people. This is the same. You had it very often in history, and maybe I can add this. It was always in history that if negative things happened, like economic crisis or disasters, or, for example, in the Middle Age, the plague, that minorities, people looked for scapegoats, especially minorities. You know, in Europe, between 60,000 and 80,000 women were killed in the Middle Ages because as witches, and they are Jewish people were attacked because they said Jewish people, they poisoned the well or something like this. And you have this always. If there is a crisis, for example, take the last crisis before the Corona crisis, this was the financial crisis, 2008, 2009, then bankers were scapegoats. I think you had this in London, I spoke about it. And for people, it seems very easy if you tell them, look there, the greedy banker, he caused the crisis. I read some dozen books about the financial crisis, and in my book, The Power of Capitalism, I have my own chapter about this topic, and it's very complicated. But 99.9% of the people, they don't understand it because it's very difficult. But if you tell them, look there's this group that's greedy bankers. What, for me, it's as logical if you say the reason for the crash of an airplane is gravity. It's as logical if you say it was the greedy banker. And now in the Corona crisis, you see the same. For example, Bill Gates, yes, he is, there are a lot of conspiracy theories. You know, he's one of the richest men in the world. And by the way, he's one who did so much to fight against poverty and hunger and disease all over the world. But the conspiracy theories, because he's rich, they tell all these things that he made the coronavirus maybe to become more rich, to earn more billions than with a vaccine. Or some people had this conspiracy theories in Arab countries about Jewish people or about the Rothschild family, for example. And so you have always this this scapegoating. But it's always in history that people look for scapegoats, and these are very often minorities. And rich people, this is one of the theses of my books, are one in this in this connection. They are minority like other minorities.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, let's move on. We've got about 10 questions. Please keep them coming. We've got just over half an hour. And the first question I'm going to ask actually relates to something you just said about crises. It's an anonymous attendee, but they said, are national crises more likely to increase prejudice? There was a strong anti-rich consensus during World War II, for example, and some examples during COVID. What drives that? Fear, frustration, or other factors?
Yes, sure. As I said, I think it's mostly about scapegoating. The people, they always look for someone who's responsible for this. And it's true, on the other hand, in crisis, it's for rich people, it's always better as it is for poor people. But it's not only crisis, but it's every day. This is the reason why everyone, or a lot of people, want to get rich. And I heard not from somebody who said my purpose or my aim is life to become poor. Because, yes, why? Because rich people have a better life. But maybe in this crisis, like now Corona crisis, you feel it more that sure, of course, there is a difference, that sure, rich people can get also affected by the by the Corona crisis, but maybe they have some better medical care or support, or maybe in the war they have better bunker or whatever. And so I think in the crisis, this social differences and inequality becomes more issue for a lot of people. And even politicians, sometimes they try to with this hate speech against rich people. You know, my first doctoral thesis was about Adolf Hitler, and sure, everyone knows that he hated Jewish people, and he connected very often Jewish people and not only communists but capitalism as well, and what he called financial capital. But you find as well in his speeches a lot of negative stereotypes against rich people, praising the workers. You know, the Nazis, they called themselves Workers' Party. In a way, they were a Workers' Party because 40% of their members were workers. And in his speeches, there were, from Adolf Hitler, there were a lot of anti-rich sentiments as well, or from Joseph Goebbels. So they exploit these feelings that you have anyway.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next question. We have from Emmanuel Cossack, who asks, thank you for the webinar, very interesting. Would you consider the use of social media, especially Instagram, as an increasing reason for younger generation to be more jealous or envious? These are platforms where the life of the rich gets presented in a very distorted way, are growing tremendously, and might be used to distribute propaganda and fake news or any other political ideologies. So does social media exacerbate this problem, make people more envious?
It was, to be honest, not a part of my research, but I think I can degree. It's not only social media. I spoke about traditional newspapers and Hollywood movies, but sure, in the social media, for example, you had a lot of these conspiracy theories. You saw it now in the Corona crisis, and these conspiracy theories, as mentioned before, there were very often rich people like Bill Gates scapegoat. And the other thing that that rich people are portrayed in Instagram, for example, but not only there, in a way that is not very realistic. You see them always, if you show pictures about rich people, you see them always with their luxury cars, with drinking champagne, and with their luxury residentials and all this, because sure, this is the kind of picture people want to see. If you would have a realistic picture the daily life of rich people, and I know a lot of rich people because my second doctoral dissertation, it was about rich people, and I interviewed rich people who had between 30 million and 1 billion euro. And I know a lot of rich people, and their daily life, it has nothing to do with this, what you can see in Instagram and media. Their daily life is to work, to have a conference, to make their telephone call sitting on the computer. But this is not the kind of picture that people want to see. I think it's not very attractive if you would show some rich entrepreneur sitting there on his computer and writing emails, or sitting in a conference. No one will see this. But this is what rich people are doing almost all over the day. But a lot of people, and this is another problem, they don't know rich people in person. Yes, we had one question, how many millionaires do you know better in person? And it was only a minority. And maybe I can add at this point one interesting result from this with research. Here it is for, I have the numbers for Germany. For example, we gave to the interviewers a list with personality traits, and positive personality traits, negative personality traits. And then we asked which, if any, of the following are most likely to apply to rich people. And in Germany, 62% said self-centered, 56% materialistic, 50% ruthless, 49% greedy, 43% arrogant. Only after this negative personal traits, there were other positive traits like intelligence and so mentioned. But, and this is the interesting story, what I want to tell you now. Then we asked only those respondents who said that they know at least one millionaire in person, and we asked them the same question about the millionaire they know the best, and we asked them which, if any, of the following are most likely to apply to the millionaire you know best. And the answer was 71% industrious, 71% intelligent, 58% imaginative, 47% optimistic, 45% visionary and far-sighted. And you have this as well with a lot of other minorities. If you don't know people from a minority, you have sometimes more prejudice, negative stereotypes, and you have only this what you see in social media or in other media. But if you know this person personal, then you have sometimes quite a different view.
Yes, it reminds me very much of the book, I'm sure you know it, The Millionaire Next Door, the, what's it called? The Surprising Secrets of America's Wealthy by Thomas Stanley and
yes,
William
a great
Danko.
book, a great book, yes.
And it's amazing because what it says is that most millionaires don't live on Park Lane or Beverly Hills. They actually live next door, live in, have ordinary houses, ordinary cars, but they have a lot of accumulated wealth that they saved up over their time.
Absolutely, yes. For example, he asked them what cars they drive, and there was always a very minority who drove a Mercedes, or I think only 1% who had a Ferrari or Lamborghini or something like this, and the car that was driven most by these millionaires was a simple Ford, for example. And I think most of them, or 75% when I have it in my mind, had never bought shoes more expensive, like I think it was something like $250 or this. Okay, at this time it was more as it is today, but this was as well here with their watch. Most of them never bought expensive watch. This was about the millionaire next door. And sure, there are these very rich, super rich people, billionaires who have this expensive cars and so on. I think it's not there's not any problem with this. The only thing that I want to say, that these pictures, and this was the question that you see in Instagram and in other media, that it's not a realistic picture about rich people. I can maybe add one thing to support the thesis. In my second doctoral dissertation, where I had this in-depth interviews with 45 rich people, one of my questions was, what does money mean for you? And I had a lot of possible answers like independence, freedom, more security, safety maybe, and one answer was that you can afford the good things in life, like luxury products with nice cars and so. And there was a group, maybe 1/3 of them, who said this is very important. We had a scale from 1, what means not important at all, to 10, what mean very important. And there were, I think, 1/3 of them who said it is between 7 and 10. It was important, but there were others was absolutely not important. I remember one billionaire, even he told me it was only one time in his life vacation, and he never bought a shirt more expensive than €30 for example. And so rich people are different in this way. What they had in common, what was more important for them than this luxury goods, was as a motive, independence and freedom. What means that you that most of them worked, but it's different whether you have to work to pay your bills, or whether you can decide whether you want to work, or where you work, what you work, when you work. And this means financial freedom, and this was much more important for most of them than luxury goods.
Great. Well, let's turn to the next question from Miko Arevio. Sorry, I apologize, Miko. I clearly pronounced your name badly. Rainer, did you ask whether your informants considered markets as a moral or immoral order, or if markets had no moral content but produced positive or negative social results?
Whether the market causes negative results like poverty. Was this one question, so? Did I get it?
Yes,
correct?
But basically the question is, did you ask them whether they had a view of the market, whether they particularly had a view of the market, either on the moral dimension, or did they think that the market produced, free markets produced positive or negative social results?
For a poll, representative poll with where you ask everyone in society, I think a question like this, I think I understand the question, would be much too complicated, what they think about moral and the market and so. But we had some other questions. I mentioned one question with this zero-sum belief, that yes, there are a lot of people who believe that rich people are only rich because poor people are poor. But sorry, we had this question. I think it would be too complicated, but I can tell you something about this. If you speak about market and poverty, I can tell you my opinion. I think that it's totally wrong. Market is the best thing against poverty. You saw it in the last 35 years, because there was no time in history where so many people escaped extreme poverty as in the last 35 years. I think more than 1.2 billion people escaped poverty, and this was only the result of capitalist globalization, especially in China, where 1981, you had 88% of the Chinese people living in extreme poverty. Today, it's less than 1%. And what was the reason? Because in China, they introduced more elements of private property and market, what they didn't have before. In the end of the 50s, you had, for example, no market at all. You had this greatest socialist experiment in history, what Mao called the Great Leap Forward. And at this time, what a lot of people don't know, you had 45 million people who died there as a result of this socialist experiment. And the market was the best thing that happened for Chinese people, that they introduced more market. This was the best thing to fight poverty, because this happened never before in history, that in only 3 or 4 decades, the percentage of extreme poverty was reduced from 88 to 1%. So I think this is a sure, anti-capitalists share this view that market, or they call it capitalism, is responsible for bad things happening in the world like poverty. But I, for myself, have absolutely the contrary opinion.
Okay, our next question from Andy Mayer. He says he obviously agrees that the prejudice is probably real, but is it any worse now than, say, during I remember in my youth, the Baader-Meinhof gang, and acts of terror by anarchist youth against the rich? Is it any worse now?
Can you please, sorry, repeat it a little bit more slowly?
I'm sorry,
sure that I got the question.
We agreed, sorry, langsam. So Andy is saying he has no doubt that the prejudice against the rich is real, but is it worse now than, say, 40 years ago, when we had things like the Baader-Meinhof gang, for example, and the anarchist youth who used to attack the rich?
This is a very good question. I think he's absolutely right, and his examples are important for one reason. Maybe, I don't know if everyone knows it in the UK, so maybe I can explain it. We had there this terrorist groups in Germany, but we had it also in Italy and in other countries. But in Germany, we had this so-called Red Army faction. These were extreme left-wing people, and they killed some rich people in Germany because they were rich. And why do I mention this? Why do I say it is important? Because I say words can become deeds. Yes, this is what people often don't see. If I speak now about Germany at this moment, fortunately, we don't have the situation. We at this moment we have no leftist terrorists who really kill rich people, but they, for example, in Berlin, where I'm living, every year hundreds of cars are burned, especially cars of rich people. It happens almost every day. If you have Mercedes and so on, yes, they burn it only because this is a symbol of capitalism for them. Or if you, for example, the CEO here of a housing company in Berlin, you have a lot of discussions about high rents, and so, because, by the way, in London, you would laugh about what they mean with high rents, because on average, people in Berlin pay rent of €7 per square meter. But we have this discussion, and there's a lot of aggression against people from the rich people from the real estate industry. And here's one company, for example, that's the CEO. He can only go out of his house with 5 or 6 bodyguards. And another one, I know him, was attacked, so they didn't kill one. But the question was whether it is worse as it is 40 years ago. It's hard to compare it, but I think this question is important, because sometimes people ask me, okay, maybe there are prejudice or stereotypes against rich people, but what's the problem? They have a good life. And sure, I agree, rich people have a better life than poor people. This is the reason why people want to get rich. But what they don't understand, they don't know much about history. What I repeat always, that words can become deeds, and this is what happened in the 20th century. If you look, for example, in Russia, what happened there when 500 or 600,000 so-called kuliks, rich, wealthy peasants, were killed only because they were rich. And things like this happened in the Cultural Revolution in China, and it happened in Cambodia. And I think this would be a very interesting research project. Rich people in history, especially in the 20th century, when they were murdered, killed, and so because they are rich. There's this book about rich and poverty from George Gilder, I don't know exactly how you pronounce it in English, and he has there some examples in this book, only one page, but this is very interesting. And he says there's an unwritten history about how they harmed rich people in history, and this is why it is important. So my book is a warning, yes. If there is this hate speech, yes, and you have this hate speech against rich people, you have as well this hate speech against other minorities. We know that first it's hate speech, and in the next step it can become bloody, very bloody.
Sorry, I muted myself. Next question from Professor Martin Ricketts, who chairs our Academic Advisory Council. He says, is there any evidence that different sources of their riches makes a difference to attitudes? So for example, do people have a more negative or positive attitude, say towards people who've inherited wealth, or people who've got their wealth through entrepreneurial activity, or sports stars, for example? Is there any difference in attitudes? They might all have the same levels of wealth, but they have different sources of wealth.
Absolutely. First, it's a very good question, and we had exactly this question because before I conducted this survey, there were some other surveys in different countries about rich people, and they never differentiated between the sources of their wealth. And I had the feeling that it could really make a difference what are the source of the wealth. And so I think that we had 10 or 12 groups like entrepreneurs, self-employed people, lottery winners, heirs, bankers, sportsmen, real estate investors, and so on. And we asked people, what do you think, which of these groups deserve to be rich? So, and as you can expect, and this is a positive thing, in all countries, entrepreneurs were at the top. But then there was one very funny thing. I hope I can explain it because it's a little bit complicated. You know, we distinguished between these groups of envious and non-envious, according to how they answer to all these other questions. And then we could see the difference how envious and non-envious people responded to this, to exactly this question. And for example, with this more envious people, I know it now from, I have it in my mind from Germany, there were much more envious people who said lottery winner deserves to be rich more than even entrepreneurs, and I think you can explain this. It's maybe a little bit complicated by psychological explanation. You know, if someone is envious, it means that that he want to have something that rich people have, and this can cause the question, why do I not have it, what the rich people have? And this is maybe sometimes an uncomfortable question for your self-conscious, or it can cause some feeling of inferiority against people who are more successful in life. And if you have this easy explanation. Oh, he had more luck. Yes, then you can accept it. Then you can accept it. This is the reason why most the envious people, there were much more who said a lottery winner deserves if he becomes rich. What is not very logical, because on the other hand, the same people criticized top managers or CEO of companies, and they were of the opinion they don't, if they earn maybe 300 times more as an average employee, they don't deserve it because they work not so much more as the average employee. So on the one hand, they said the top manager, he doesn't deserve to be rich because he doesn't work so much or harder or longer than employee. But on the other hand, he says the lottery winner deserves to be rich, but what did he work? He made only the cross. It was pure luck, but you can explain it with envy. And this was very interesting for me, because there is a standard textbook about envy written by a German sociologist, and he had this theory that the envious people, they should think that the lottery winner deserves more to be rich, because he wrote, no woman will blame her husband that he was wrong last Saturday with making a cross in the lottery. Yes, but this was only his theory, and I proved this theory right with this question. So very good question, and you can find it in my book, all the data to differentiate with its different groups, with heirs, with lottery winners, with entrepreneurs, and with financial investors, real estate investors. You can find all the data in the book.
It's very interesting, that sort of whole psychological aspect of it, in terms of, maybe people see, even though it's not in reality, maybe people see the lottery ticket as a more transparent way of accumulating wealth, and maybe or the other way is it's relatively easier, isn't it? We still have this phenomenon. We have this phenomenon in recent years with reality shows, where people can have their 5 minutes of fame, not famous for being famous, as it were, and maybe it's a relatively easy route to wealth.
Maybe,
yeah.
But I think it has something to do with luck, because this is another fact that people who are not so successful economically, that a lot of them have the explanation, the other guy became only rich because he had more luck, because this is more comfortable for his self-conscious. And even rich people, sometimes if you ask them why they became rich, if you ask something like Bill Gates, how he became rich, you will hear similar answers. They will tell you they had more luck. Or if you ask a very successful sportsman why he won, sometimes some people said luck, but it's only a defensive strategy against envy, because maybe it would sound not so very good for people if I would tell someone, do you want to know why I'm more rich as you? Because I'm more intelligent, I worked harder, I'm more creative. So this is the reason. Very simple. I think this would sound not so good for most of people. So it sounds better if I said, okay, I had more luck, and then it's easier for other people to accept it.
Okay, next question. Charlie Mannix-Beale, he says, today, more so than ever, we aspire to live in a meritocratic society. Do you think there is a correlation between negative attitudes towards the rich and the perception of living in a meritocracy?
I don't know whether I really understand what is meant by living in a meritocracy. That mean that rich people rule in society, when I understand it right. Do I understand it right?
Yeah.
Yes. But I have doubts. First of all, I want to say whether this is whether this is the case. Yes, it's always said that rich people have more influence, but I will tell you some facts why I don't believe it. Look, for example, you can say in the United States, this is the example that is always made for this system, that rich people have so much influence, and of course they have influence, but it's totally wrong to say that that wealth is easily transformed in political influence. If it were the case, though, we never had Barack Obama as president of the United States 2 times, and even we had not Donald Trump, because the other nominees of the Democratic Party at this time, like Jeb Bush, for example, he got much more money, much more support as Donald Trump got at this time. Donald Trump was not the favorite candidate of most rich people in the United States. And now maybe I don't speak about United States, maybe I can speak about my own country where I'm living. I know that most people, rich people that I know, are very unhappy with his policy, and they would laugh about the opinion that that here's a kind of meritocracy where rich people rule. This is absolutely not the case. If you look, for example, I can say it here from my country, in the energy policy or the policy with the automotive industry, or the policy toward housing companies. This is all what the rich people in Germany, they hate this kind of policy. And so I think what was in this question, I think so, the opinion that we live in a society really ruled by rich people. I have doubts about it. Definitely, I can say in Germany it's not the case. We have much more influence by so-called NGOs with their green policy, what they do with climate change, and so. And I think, in my opinion, this caused a lot of problem. And maybe it sounds strange for some people, but I would appreciate if we had a society with more influence of rich people as we have today, especially when I speak about Germany, or if I speak about France, for example. A lot of problems in France are there. France, I mentioned before, are the most envious nation. Why? I think all rich people, they would embrace this labor reforms, labor market reforms that France, that Macron want to make, but he couldn't come through with these reforms because there's all this resistance from unions and from the population. So I have doubts whether it's true. Sure, rich people have some influence in society, but I think they have not so much influence like it is said very often than the story.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's see, we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. The next set of questions are anonymous, and they're related to superheroes and how the rich are portrayed. So one person says, is the solution more Batman? And I'm going to elaborate on that. You know, Batman, you know, and say, well, no, Batman is an example of crony capitalism, but portrayed in a positive way. You know, and okay, what about Iron Man? You know, Iron Man is an example of libertarian success, and he's portrayed in a positive way. So surely some of the superheroes that you see portrayed, you know, Batman or Iron Man, is actually an example of portraying rich people in a positive way rather than a negative way. What do you have to say to those anonymous attendees who put that counterpoint to you?
To be honest, in our research, I know we had this 43 movies with in-depth research, and I think there was neither Batman or Iron Man, because we had to make one decision in the beginning what kind of movies we analyzed, and these were more realistic movies. Sure, you can also analyze these movies, but I know definitely, and to be honest, I have to admit it, that I don't know this movies. But by the way, there comes a very funny thing in my mind. A story about, it's not about Batman or Iron Man, but it's about James Bond. And I had an interview with a leftist journalist in Germany, and he had very different opinions from my opinion, but I liked him and I think he liked me. And at the end of the interview, he asked me one question. He said, Mr. Zitelmann, please let us be honest for a moment. I think in the end, the super rich are exactly like this people that we know from this James Bond movie who want to rule all over the world. To be honest, I think they are this way. And then I asked him one question: how many super rich people do you know in person? And he was honest and he told me he knows absolutely no rich, even not a millionaire, but no billionaire. He knew no one. And then I told him, so please, this is the difference between you and me. I know them in person. I made my doctoral dissertation about them. I interviewed them, and you know them from the James Bond movie. And this is the difference. I think it has nothing to do with the question, but it came in my mind when we speak about movies.
No, it's a fair enough point, and thank you very much for taking on that question. Let's try and squeeze in one, if we can give you quite a quick answer on this one. Christopher Marshall says, most of the prejudice against rich people seems to be against what we call new money. Is this fair that people are more prejudiced against recently acquired wealth as opposed to people from families that have got a longer history of wealth?
I'm not quite sure whether this is correct. Sure, it would not be fair because in our research, we had this question before: if you distinguish the source where the money comes from, the heirs were not so positive judged like the entrepreneurs. And so I'm not sure whether it's right, but sometimes I know there's, I never understood this. I know this prejudice against the new rich, what I never understood, because new rich, it means nothing else mostly than self-made people. And this is another very important thing, maybe that I should add. It has nothing to do with the study, but this is also the stereotype. This is absolutely wrong. I hear it almost every day. Yes, in former times, it was possible to become rich, self-made, but today it's much harder. It's not possible. Most of the rich people are heirs today and not self-made. This is absolutely wrong. I can tell you for United States, for example, you know the Forbes list of the richest Americans. These are 400 people in America. And Forbes, they have a research whether these people are self-made or silver spoon. They call it self-made and silver spoon. And they have like a scoring system, because it's not only a yes and no, because it's a little bit complicated. Yes, but for example, extreme example for someone 100% self-made is like Oprah Winfrey, who became the first Black self-made woman in the world with a net worth of 2.7 billion today. And there are other people who aired everything. And now what's interesting, 1984, only 48% of the rich people in America were self-made. Today, it's 67%. And if you look at this list of the richest people in the world, you can see it. Number one, Jeff Bezos, self-made. Then Bill Gates, self-made. Warren Buffett, self-made. Or take someone like Sergey Brin or Larry Page from Google founders, self-made. Or Mark Zuckerberg, self-made. Yes. So this story you can hear today. It's almost impossible to get rich today, self-made. It was possible in former times, but today not. On the contrary, it's absolutely wrong.
Okay. Well, sorry, I'm just right. So on that, I think we've got just about hit the hour. So Dr. Zitelmann, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you very much for answering all those questions. As you can see in the Q&A function, there are a number of unanswered questions, which shows just how popular and interested the audience were. We really appreciate you taking the time. To our audience, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did and many others did. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you to all the viewers and the listeners for joining us. And stay safe. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.